In today's podcast, we are discussing a report which has been collated and put together from a company called Tradify, who are a job management CRM designed for trade businesses. Essentially, they put together this report during the COVID-19 pandemic so they could ascertain some of the trends, some of the data, some of the statistics in relation to the effects that this pandemic has had on them through multiple different areas and different aspects of their organization. Everything from the amount of invoices they're creating, through what they value in their business, so on and so forth. So in this conversation, I'm talking with the CEO of Tradify, Michael, and we dive deep into, I suppose, some of the outcomes of the report. And then we also talk a little bit about some of the trends that he thinks are going to be more apparent to trade businesses basically off the back of this pandemic, and some of the things that we can expect to see looking forward in the space of how businesses' operations may improve as a result, and how some of their processes might be streamlined. And interestingly as well, he touched on some of the more significant, let's say, considerations that are now being brought to the surface from trade businesses, which is something that we preach a lot of on the show, pretty much all of them, and we actually deliver on most of these as well over at Tradie Web Guys, in the space of having a great web presence, having technologies that enable you to manage your email marketing, your follow-up processes, and all these kind of things. So it was a really good conversation, and this report, guys, is actually available to all of you. So if you want to follow along, the links are going to be in the show notes to this episode. By all means, head across there where you can get access to those. And I'd love to hear if your experience has been anything similar to what's in this report. This report was collated from a whole bunch of businesses throughout Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. However, for you guys over in North America, I'd also love to see if this is, or hear about if this has been some of your experiences. By all means, head across to the Facebook group for the site shed there and be part of that conversation when this goes live. I may even post a link to this report so we can have a bit of a conversation about it, see how some of these trends might relate to what you guys have actually been experiencing in various markets from all over the world. Anyway, guys, enjoy this show. I'm sure you're going to love it. Again, if you want to get access to this report, you can just head across to the show notes and we'll send you in the right direction over at thesiteshed.com. Otherwise, that's enough for me. Enjoy the show. Let's dive right in. Today's podcast has been proudly brought to you by Tradie Web Guys. Tradie Web Guys work with tradespeople only on their websites and marketing solutions to help them stand out from their competition. Everything from web design through to SEO, search engine marketing, content creation, you name it, guys. It is a customized solution for trade-based organizations, and it's fantastic. Head across to tradiewebguys.com.au/apply, fill in the form, and let's have a conversation.
Giving tradies and contractors around the globe the tools to run a modern business. You're listening to Toolbox Talks from the Site Shed. Now here's your host, Matt Jones.
Hello listeners and viewers, welcome back to the Site Shed podcast. And today you're joining myself and Michael, the CEO of Tradify HQ, across the ditch over in New Zealand. How are you, mate?
Yeah, very well, thanks, Matt. Yeah, doing well.
Great to have you. As I was saying offline, I think this conversation's been quite a long time coming, so it's good to finally put a face to the name.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You're from Tradify. I mean, I'm sure most of the listeners and viewers out there are well and truly familiar with Tradify. If they're not, guys, it's a fantastic job management software, which heaps and heaps of our listeners and viewers use and absolutely rave about in our community. So good job, Michael.
Thank you. We're very grateful for everyone using the product, and fantastic to hear that.
It's such a cool product. It's such an exciting space as well, that whole technology for tradies, like there's so many cool little things that are constantly evolutions, everything's kind of moving. It's really, really good to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're really excited about the future for software for tradespeople, for tradies. Yeah, absolutely.
And so you guys have been busy. You put together this awesome report, which is what we're kind of here to talk about today, actually. Do you want to give us a bit of a background as to what you've done, why you did it, what the point is?
Yeah, so I think we, like the rest of the world, we saw this sort of COVID kick off at the start of this year, and one of the things we do is we look very intently at what our customers are doing in our platform, really to get a sense of features we need to build, the sort of most popular parts of our product, that type of stuff. And clearly, as we went into lockdowns in different parts of the world, we started to see a shift in quote volumes, invoices being sent, number of jobs being created. And clearly that was a concern for us, for our customer base. We wanted to sort of dig in really post those lockdowns and understand, what does this really mean for tradies? And we looked at Australia, the UK and New Zealand, to sort of survey a sort of pretty decent sized group of our customers and try and figure out, the numbers we'd seen kind of happen back in April, and obviously still in some places like Victoria, obviously there's unfortunately still lockdowns to some degree. What was the level of impact and what was the confidence amongst our tradie customers for the future? And so we commissioned this piece of research to really understand, what has COVID done to your business and how do you feel about it in the next sort of 6 to 12 months? And that was the intention behind that.
Right. And so you've collated this report. Now, was this report, I'm guessing it hasn't included the recent lockdown in Melbourne, is that right?
I just think in terms of the timing we sent out, we may have just missed it, although I would say the results probably still correlate. I mean, there are definitely differences in Victoria in the results that we see versus the rest of Australia. So I think it still captured some of the general sentiment and feeling that's there, unfortunately, yes.
Just before we sort of dive into it a little bit more, for anyone that wants to read on and follow on, what's the best place for them to get hold of this report?
So I will tell you, if you go to, bear with me a sec.
I'll obviously make it.
There's an open website URL which you can share afterwards, and then you can find the report there, and it breaks it down by market. So yeah, you can download the specific Australian version online.
If you guys want that, actually, if you want to follow along with what we're talking about, I'll make those links available within the show notes. So just head across to the episode page for this podcast, and you'll be able to get access to all of that. It's quite interesting, actually. And I suppose to a degree, quite promising. The lack of impact, I should say, that a lot of Australians are feeling after this, or in the wake of, or during this pandemic. I suppose it looks like some of the other people around the world have been a bit more affected, would you say?
Yeah, I think it depends on where you're at in terms of lockdown. So Australia, I think, has definitely been the most positive. So sort of 2/3 of respondents felt there was little or no impact on their business. In fact, in many instances, if you look at the verbatims from some of our customers, some of them are actually busier than they've ever been. That still leaves a chunk of people that have suffered. So I don't think we can understate that this is a universally positive story, but it's still good that at least 2/3 feel good about it. If you compare that to the UK as a sort of direct comparison in kind of market size, it's more like, it's definitely a larger impact, more like 50-50. And obviously they're going back into some form of lockdown more recently. And so, yeah, there is a noticeable difference between those two countries. And New Zealand's more like 50%. 49% actually feel pretty good about things, 50% or so do not. So again, Australia is definitely the most positive. And I think we put that down to a few things, but I think there's definitely been some government intervention in Australia, which has helped, I think, regenerate the market to some degree. But again, I think where you see lockdowns, that's generally where you've seen a sort of direct impact on the amount of work that people can do.
So, I mean, is this whole report, is it about like seeing who's positive and who's not positive, or is it about sort of really outlining the bottom line of a lot of these organizations? And
I think it's more about outlining what does this really mean for the industry moving forward directly from, there's lots of public data that's out there and predictions from different organizations around where things could end up. And I think we wanted to get more of a pulse, and that's kind of why we called it the Pulse Report, was really to sort of kind of put our finger on the sort of direct customers that we have to understand, okay, we see the reports, we see some of the doom and gloom stuff. What does it really mean for our customers? And that was really the intention behind it, and understand how they felt about the sort of next 6 months, because obviously the lockdown restrictions, generically speaking, down this end of the world have become slightly less severe outside of Victoria. And so that was really the intent behind that.
We've got loads and loads of clients and our community members that really have been probably, I'd say, I don't like to say positively affected, but I'd like to say during the pandemic, they found they were getting busier. And I don't know if we sort of put that down to the fact that they've kind of, everybody's gone from being at work, being at school, being at university, and all of a sudden they're at home now. There's 3 times as many people flicking lights on and off and flushing toilets, and things are just blocking up and going out, So
I think that's totally, it was a couple of things. There's less people doing holidays. I think less travel has meant that people are looking at ways, if they've still got disposable income, looking at ways to spend that money, combined with the nature of the fact that you're at home, spotting things that need doing. I think that's part of it. And it's easier when you're home to get people to come and do work and quote and finish that job. So I think that's definitely a big driver of that. In actually in all markets, we've had that sort of debate and feedback for sure.
Yeah, I suppose some of the guys that are more project based, they've kind of, some of them slowed down. Like we've got some clients that are in North America, and they certainly had a lot of contracts put on pause, which basically grinded things to a halt purely because they couldn't get in there, which is, it is what it is. And then we've had other clients that were sort of, say builders and the like, who have been, essentially they've been able to continue on the projects they were doing, but then they were unsure as to what might happen, post lockdown in terms of lead flow and that kind of thing. But the general consensus now, and especially a lot of our clients and colleagues in Victoria, is that, they've just got backlogs and backlogs of projects. Like it's just going to, once the restrictions are lifted, they're going to be absolutely slammed, which I wonder if it's going to raise another series of problems, in terms of product supply, staff, timeline delays. And this is the kind of thing I think that in Australia we're a little bit, and perhaps New Zealand also, we're kind of a little bit blessed in the sense that we don't have these months where you can't work. North Americans are like, oh yeah, well, I'm a landscape gardener. I live in British Columbia. Like we 3-4 months a year we can't work anyway because we're snowed under. So it's kind of an interesting paradigm shift, I think, for a lot of guys. What's your take on that? Is that the kind of the feel that you're getting in terms of?
Yeah, what I would say is that the majority, sort of 73% of our survey was residential. So I think that reflects some of what you're describing there in terms of workload. We've definitely heard about the supplier issue, concerns around actually getting hold of suppliers. In fact, it's a personal anecdote, but I had some work done recently, and the tradies that were doing the work ran out of wood decking. And actually, and I was sort of initially like, how can you run out of wood decking? And actually, in fairness, the suppliers had run out of wood decking because there was such a demand in that period of people having that work done. So I think that's definitely a thing we've seen. And that's the thing that came through from the survey in Australia, certainly, is there is this buoyancy about the future, which is really positive. We feel good about that. And we hope it continues.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. What are some of your key takeaways from this report? Obviously, this report goes through things like volume of quotes and jobs and invoices and blah, blah, blah. Like, I imagine when you collated that report, a lot of it wasn't a huge surprise to you. So what were some of those more significant takeaways from your perspective?
I think the big thing we were looking at as a software provider, that's, one of the things we're really interested in is the level of process involved in tradies work. And one of the sort of clear things that always comes through is, our kind of catchphrase is give tradies their life back. And what we're really trying to do there is, we figure that tradies don't want to spend time doing spreadsheets and invoicing and all that good stuff. It's kind of why the business was initially started. That was reinforced in the feedback that we had, that actually most people are really looking to sort of create a living for their family, create a lifestyle for themselves. It's not always about money. And so actually, one of the things that came through is most, and there's a pretty big chunk of, it was like 40% of people are spending 12 hours or more on admin, which wasn't a surprise. It's kind of like I said, why we started the business, but was still pretty significant. And I think one of the things that also came through, there is the negative sides of COVID, that lead generation, managing your online presence and those types of things, I think will become more important. And I think there's more tradies definitely thinking about that and trying to sort of professionalize how they approach their kind of online presence and lead gen. So that was, for us, again, wasn't a massive surprise, but the numbers reinforce that supposition. And the other thing is there are differences in different industries. You sort of touched on it. We saw, for example, that HVAC seemed to suffer more in that period than plumbing or electrical, for example.
Because it's more project-based installs.
Project-based, and there were restrictions in certain areas about how they could do that work. And so, yeah, for sure that had an impact.
Yeah, it's interesting what you were saying about, what businesses prioritize. I know in the report here, you've even got something saying, like a little bar graph there with the, why did you start your business, and money's right down the bottom.
Yeah, no, that surprised me to a degree. I think it comes through in our customer feedback. But yeah, that was really interesting, and it does make you reframe how you think about this.
Yeah, and I suppose it's one of those things where, like you say, getting some of that time back is really, really paramount. And I think a lot of guys now, like, success means so many different things to so many different people, and I think most of us have cottoned on to the idea that, making $1 million a year, but not ever seeing your family, your friends, or anything like that is not really successful. And
No,
so
probably you'd realize that when it's probably too late as well, unfortunately. Yeah.
right, which is, yeah, exactly right. And there's many people before us that have basically said that on their deathbed, haven't they? But then I think it has been, like, from our point of view, we're quite heavily in the technology space, websites, digital marketing, that kind of stuff. And a lot of the conversations did sort of shift a lot more to, well, I've always been a word of mouth company, and now I kind of realize that even that perhaps I may still remain largely a word of mouth company, but I do need to look more professional, and now's a good time for me to invest in that sort of thing. So we've had a lot of companies that have kind of perhaps been on the fence with that business shift over the years because of the old, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of mindset. Then all of a sudden they're like, well, I can see that it's kind of broken a little bit. Let's try and fix it. It doesn't necessarily mean either they have to go from being a word of mouth company to being a company that's running Google ads and, doing all those marketing things. But it just essentially means that they've turned a corner in realizing that they need to be better represented, because they're only a click away from, a competitor who may look better online or whatever that might be, So that's quite interesting. It's one of those things, right? We've been saying that for years to people, then all of a sudden something like this happens. Everyone's like, oh, we should do this. I'm like, oh, good idea.
It's really fascinating because there's sort of two things that come through for me. One is sort of time to quote becomes more important because customers, end customers, consumers, sort of level of tolerance for, their decision-making process is going to get shorter. I think we definitely saw some of that happen. So time to quote is really important, right? So your time to quote is using pen and paper. You're going to potentially lose work. I think the idea of bringing sort of CRM functionality to tradespeople is really fascinating. I think tradies using CRMs, back to your point about word of mouth, even if it's word of mouth, having those contact details, being able to sort of do outreach to your kind of existing customer base could become even more important in the future. And then just the way you look and feel and the quotes that you send, the invoices, all that type of stuff. I think expectation of the end consumer's gone up because of what's available. So yeah, all those things do become more important. And if there is a downturn and, this is a sort of temporary kind of increase in work and that suddenly drops off in 9 months, these things become even more important. So yeah,
I think it's also perhaps not forced, but certainly brought to the front of these guys' minds the importance of, like, planning, and actually, the biggest enemy of a great life's a good life kind of thing. These guys have been working for so many years and everything's been working fine. Then, all of a sudden, like, the brakes are put on a little bit and they're like, or the opposite, maybe like where the accelerator's been hit, which has happened a lot to customers. And either way, they can both have some pretty significant positive and negative ramifications if it's not managed correctly. But I think, like, it's forced people to kind of consider these things and do a bit more strategy and a little bit more planning in order to sort of, if not mitigate, certainly navigate, these kind of obstacles that may appear. And, like, I think everyone's of the same like in the same mindset when we say this isn't going to be the last time we're going to see something like this. Like, this is going to happen again for sure. We're in what capacity? We're not sure. Is it a GFC? Is it like, is it a world war or whatever? Things happen.
Yeah. So some level of, I think we've definitely seen a move towards wanting to have more predictability in kind of workload, like you said, whether that's positive or negative, right? If it's a sudden upswing, how do I manage to get enough subbies on board to do the work or whatever it might look like? So yeah, I think that sort of ability to sort of forecast, dare I say it, the business a bit further out will be more important, definitely.
Yeah, and I think, like, interestingly, like you were saying, how guys are trying to adopt these technologies because they've realized that, perhaps there's a better way. And because I think as well now, there was this important part of their operating process, which they were essentially forced to employ, which was, we now have to, like, proactively, like, educate our customers as to how we're navigating and how we're handling our jobs during this pandemic. Like, that sort of forced them to realize, well, I need to have a way to communicate with them beyond the traditional bang on the door, speak to them face to face. I need to be proactive in educating them before I, rock up to their site as to what our procedures and what our protocols are, in order to manage our team on site and in order to manage the safety of our customers in their home or their office or whatever it might be. And so they were kind of forced into process, and I think that's a really good thing because all of a sudden we've got, businesses that have traditionally not consider this, all of a sudden they're like, well, now I understand. Like now I kind of get why process is important, because I need my staff to follow this procedure, or when, we're potentially not going to comply with, the rules and regulations relating to this situation. So
I think that's a really big precursor to the sort of shift towards more digital technology with Tradies. I think that definitely will accelerate that need, and sort of recording, hygiene, doing all that stuff online. I think the other thing that's interesting is, portfolios of work. So capturing the great work they've done. That's another thing we're sort of pretty fascinated by, like taking pictures and being able to sort of seamlessly share those on social media. Again, is that a lead gen vehicle, or is it just actually sort of proud of the work you've done? Again, I think we'll see more of that type of stuff as well start to accelerate.
it's funny you say that, because for the last couple of years, we've been putting so much emphasis on our clients on doing that, like creating these like lovely project galleries of jobs they've completed. I mean, the listeners and viewers are going to be sick to death of me banging on about this, but I talk about it all the time. We always get them to, every month they fill in a form, they tell us about a job they've done, and we create this beautiful project gallery on their website, which highlights, how that job's run. And the purpose of that is, like you say, it's obviously you can use it in marketing, but it's also, if you're a word of mouth company and somebody comes to you and says, hey, Michael, wondering if you've ever done like a first floor renovation in, the Upper Hutt area, you can say, well, yeah, I have actually. Here's a couple of links to projects on my website. And it basically just does the selling for you, And so I've been saying to the guys for years, like, yeah, sure, you're a plumber, you're a builder, you're a sparky, you're a landscaper, whatever, but like it or not, you are an educator. You're in the education space. And people are coming to you today in the information age because they want information. And by not giving them information, you're potentially losing a really strong lead, which kind of ties into the whole conversation around sales cycle and things like that. Like a lot of these companies have significantly longer sales cycles than, say, your emergency plumber, emergency electrician. And so being proactive from that point of time, when somebody comes to you asking or investigating potentially, a project, and by the time they pull the trigger, I mean, that could be a couple of years, you never know, right? Yeah. So taking the time, taking the effort, and actually investing in, building out that depository of resource that you can build trust and rapport with these people, and it does the selling for you. And it works unbelievably well. We do it ourselves, and it's crazy. I'd love to hear your take on this, though, because we find, and this is typically when I talk about this to people, they'll go, yep, 100% makes sense. The bottleneck that we find is in the implementation. And I always say to our clients, guys, this is one of those things where if you don't make it a part of your process, it will always get relegated in the list of important things to do.
Yep.
It's probably much like implementing Tradify, properly, or any tool, any software. Like the software is as good as you put the information you put into it. And so I think sometimes that's like the obstacle that most business have to overcome. It's okay, well, I need to actually make this part of my process. Otherwise, it's going to be more important for me to go down the pub and have a beer with my mate.
So I think it's a really good point. So our approach to it, or my sort of general thesis on this, is that, when you think about your end user, you need to make the product really sort of easy to use. So easy to use has always been a thing that we've sort of doubled down on as a company. The other thing we've invested a lot more and more recently is kind of customer support. So I actually think that to enable some of this stuff, no matter how easy it might seem, and no matter how much great software there is, actually having support people that you can talk to when you're less confident in using software, and not everyone does it as their sort of primary thing, I think is also important. And I do think the other side is, I think the tools, not just Tradify, but tools in general, are getting easier to use and more commonplace. And I think you will see that accelerate over time. The best analogy I could probably give is a company called Mindbody, who sort of did, the way I sort of see what we're doing with Tradies, they did it almost to gyms and yoga studios and Pilates studios, which was, most of those people, certainly the sort of sole proprietor businesses, were using pen and paper, and people would phone up and book a yoga slot and turn up and all the rest of it. The Mindbody product was actually pretty simplistic to begin with, and it didn't need to be any more complex. And that's sort of step one, and then it became more complex over time. And I think we're slightly ahead of that, by the way, with tradie type software. But I think that's where we'll end up, is that initially it's a very easy onboarding experience, and then it can get more complex, or more sophisticated users, or different sort of product requirements over time.
I mean, and that's, I suppose, one of the testaments to like services software, isn't it? Like essentially all of that's kind of taken care of with the subscription, which is why it's so good. It means you haven't got to constantly be R&Ding your own technology, like they do it for you. So I think that's why that SaaS, style of business is so popular.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if it's easy onboarding, it's frictionless, works with other stuff. I mean, like we plug into Zero,
Yeah.
MYOB, those types of things as well. Just so again, if you're a trader, you don't have to think, oh, if I work with this software, is it going to work with this software over here? That becomes a headache straight away. So I think that's another thing that companies like us always think about. Is like, how do you make sure that the sort of user experience is pretty frictionless? And the other piece is actually the end customer as well. Like, how can you integrate and make it work seamlessly for the end customer? And for us, that's the end customer experience is the look and feel of the quote they receive, and then the final kind of invoice. Those things are also quite important for our trading customers.
Did you find there was like a lot of revelation, I suppose, or do you find, I should say, that there's a lot of revelation when people adopt a tool like a job management tool or whatever it is, and they're finally like, oh wow, do you mean that this is what it can do? I don't have to carry this carbon copy invoice book. I don't have to carry my Reese diary. Like just the way it simplifies things.
I think that's the thing that sort of inspires the team here. It's sort of funny working on a sort of software business that's you're not necessarily. We try and stay really close to our customers, but clearly the sort of product and R&D team and are all here. But seeing the comments that come through, and we have a sort of lot of case studies around. We actually did a thing on our website about a year, probably less than a year ago, actually, where we asked our users to submit pictures of them doing fun stuff outside of work. And the whole idea was, here's the things I could do because I wasn't doing admin. I wasn't filling out spreadsheets or running paper, and they were going fishing or they were on holiday with their kids or whatever it might have been. We're a really big believer in that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think sometimes you do get that revelation of like, why was I doing this for the last 2 years? I've just saved myself, 10 hours time a week or a month or whatever that might be. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's like when you hire somebody in the business, then you just go, I don't know how I was doing that and this at the same time.
Often it's a comment. We have sort of two sets of user groups, right? It's often the owner operator, the trader themselves, or it's their bookkeeper as well. And it's the same thing. Sometimes the bookkeeper actually is part of the family in many instances. And just again, you get that feedback, which is this is just so much more simplistic and saves a ton of time, makes them more efficient, and actually brings some more insight into their business, frankly, in terms of supplier costs, what they're doing with their time sheets for subbies, all those sorts of things are also very, very important, which they didn't have as much visibility of previously. So yeah.
In this report, you've got all the data and statistics and things, and then towards the back of it, you've got some recommendations that you've put forward there. Perhaps we can skim through some of those recommendations, and I suppose more importantly, outline perhaps why they stood out over some of the other things that you might have uncovered during this research.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's some of these we've sort of touched on. The key one is really about online visibility. So I think this is really tied to the fact that there is still some nervousness, right? So I don't think, although the Australian figure is very, very positive, and we were really pleased to see that, there is still a big chunk of people that have had an impact on their business more recently. So visible online presence is important, like lead generation. And like you said, it's not necessarily about lead generation in a kind of SEM kind of marketing type of stuff. It's just about visibility in terms of your professional profile, all those types of things. The other one is time to quote, which I touched on. I think that will become more important. And I think certainly we see this in sort of residential work, the speed with which a tradie can respond to a quote, which is obviously a lot easier if you do that electronically, has become more important. And again, if a customer is sort of putting that work out to 2 or 3 tradies, we do believe that becomes really key. And the quality of that communication as well, I think is important. So I sort of touched on CRM. I think this has been a big shift amongst tradies to use CRM effectively and email effectively to communicate with customers, even whether that's I'm going to arrive, I'm going to be an hour late, that type of stuff, I think is important. Again, that helps win the quote and the job at the end. And then there is I bucket this as part of the CRM, there is this notion of how you follow up. I think that is becoming more important. And if there is, if 6 or 9 months down the line, there is less work, let's hope that's not the case. But if that was the case, again, I think that will separate tradies from each other, the ones that can respond quickly in a professional way and also do that really important follow-up, I think is going to make a big difference. So that's kind of how I bucket the kind of almost, using systems to kind of help you portray your business and win business. And then the other one, which sort of generally is kind of what our product does anyway, is really about how do you become more efficient as a business, right? So whether it's Tradify or another software tool, using software to make you invoice quicker, get paid quicker, be more efficient with how you use your time, understand how you're using your time and how the people in your organization are using their time. most efficiently is going to be important. And I think the payment piece, I think we're going to see a lot of transformation in kind of payments and how that works, and more choices for tradies to use to get paid by their end customers. And that whole notion of cash flow, if things do get tough or there are recessionary factors, will become more important.
It's funny, isn't it? Like we've got a lot of clients that so I feel like you're almost running an ad for Tradie Web Guys here, because we kind of do all those, the web presence and the CRM and all this kind of stuff is what we sort of do. But when we set like companies up, like young companies up with some tools and software, and I was the same actually for say Xero, right? So when I started my business, I started the business with Xero. And so I never knew anything different. And you hear these horror stories of people that, going through these nightmares with their, accounting and bookkeeping and all this kind of stuff. And I just think I've never experienced any of this. Like I don't understand these problems because it's just always been so easy for me. And it must be such a revelation. And then on the flip side, when we implement things like Google Drive and, email marketing CRMs into business, and they're like, oh, it's so easy. Like it's all just there, it's just this switch. And they're like, oh my God, like, it's such a funny sort of observation from my point of view, because you sort of know what's coming.
Well, it's a hard thing to know unless you've done it, right? I think when whether you're using a spreadsheet or pen and paper, it probably, when you add the time up it takes you to do that, it may not seem that significant. And it's only when you see it kind of visible way via data, via a soft piece of software, it really becomes, you really understand and actually, wow, I did spend a ton of time doing this stuff previously. So I think pen and paper, has to be on its way out. It's just a really sort of slower way of doing stuff. So yeah, we think that's going to be the big shift over the next couple of years.
I think as well, there's a lot of like directions that are kind of being forced, for business. When you look at, like one-click payroll and all this kind of stuff for, in Australia, basically for those of you guys that aren't in Australia, the government's basically said, well, you've got to have a certain process around, submitting your payroll, blah, blah, blah. So all of a sudden people kind of needed to have these technologies in place to deliver this. So it's kind of, like it or not, they're kind of being forced into it to a degree. And I feel like once they get a taste, it's like the floodgates open and they're like, what else can I do,
Yeah. I think that's the great thing about the sort of revolution in sort of software as a service businesses is it's like you mentioned Xero for you was that moment. I think we've generally seen that with customers, and then they tell other customers like, what are you doing? You're using this piece of software. Yeah, that really accelerates that shift. And COVID, unfortunately, you touched on it, but the whole need to do track and trace, all that stuff, again, that's pretty complex unless you're using technology. So again, I think will cause a movement towards more software-based tools.
Yeah, I think as well, like just having the access to your data, so like understanding even at a basic level with, like bookkeeping software and certainly, job management tools like Tradify, but understanding where your business verticals are most profitable and things like that. Having a way that you can track that easily, at the click of your thumb on your phone, sort of thing. Like that just makes such a big difference when you're like going back to what I was saying before. Like you're sort of moving into like a lot of guys are sort of starting to plan more and strategize, and they're taking the time to look at their numbers and they're taking the time to formulate these plans, and having the ability to do that made so simply through software. It's just a no-brainer. You can't go back.
No, absolutely. And especially when you think about cash flow, which is a really important thing for tradies, the ability to have visibility of that, see who's paying you when, all that kind of stuff, automate some of those tasks, so have to ring or email them. Yeah, that's really, really powerful.
I feel like we're kind of preaching to the choir to a degree, because most of the people that listen to this podcast and, part of our community are sort of relatively savvy business owners, and they're sort of, they know all this sort of stuff, and for the better part, most of them are doing it, but it still surprises me when you do speak to some people and they're like, oh, we just do it this way, and I'm like, what? But it's one of those things, I suppose, that you don't know what you don't know, isn't it? Like I've said it before a million times, but if you work in a company, and this was my experience as an apprentice when I was growing up as a plumber, I worked for a company, albeit it was 20 odd years ago, so we've gone back a while, but like we used to just do carbon copy invoices, and I never saw a problem with that. I was like, well, this works fine. You send the invoice, and then the girls in the office chase the bills for the next 3 months, and then you don't get paid, and then you move on to the next job. And like I just thought that's how it worked, until I went to another company and they were like, no, we just use this software and we just get paid on site. And I was like, they had the big bank, like remember the old school bank
big
transaction things. took up half the back of the ute just to carry it around. But like, and I was like, oh my God, you get paid on site. This makes so much sense. Why would you not do this, And so like little things like that, again, you don't know what you don't know. It's until you get exposure to these different ways of operations that then you start realizing, oh, there's actually probably a much better way to do this.
Probably a learning curve as well. I think software's improved over time. I think the initial sort of variants of software that helped different industries were probably a bit clunkier and a bit harder to use initially. And I think that put people off. And you've seen this with the advent of whether it's Facebook or email or whatever it is. Over time, that penetration rate goes up really quickly.
Yeah.
And I think it's a combination of word of mouth, lots of people using it, but also the experience just gets easier. And I think that's what we'll see, certainly with sort of tradie software. That's been the case.
Yeah, well, or any software. I mean, to be fair, it has to be simple, Like I think that has been the problem with technology, and I think as well that's a lot of, well, you know better than me, surely, but I think that's often some of the more significant objections when it comes to technology. Oh, I'm not tech savvy, or I'm not, I don't understand this, and like I just say to guys, you can't. That's great, but you got to learn. Like it's not. You can't walk around saying that anymore, like I don't care if you're 50 or 60 and you've always done something one way, like you can always learn something new,
Yeah.
And I think now the technology, like you're saying, it's becoming easier to learn, and it needs to become easier to learn so people are getting the full effect of it. Because I mean, so often, and I'm sure with Tradify as well, like people might use a fraction of what it can do and not realize that it can do so much more.
Well, the important point is, I think for us, the way we approach it is the stuff they really care about the most is the easiest thing to do. And then, of course, there are more sophisticated users that will go deeper. But ultimately, it's understanding like the user experience and how they interact with, their customers ultimately. And that's really how we build the product, is making those things seamless, simple. There might be some complexity in the back end for us to make that simple, but that's really on the software provider in my mind to make that experience easy. And then, have some level of customer support. So if someone really gets stuck, they can actually pick the phone up and have a conversation. I think that is important, and that will continue to be important. I don't see that changing necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, that's especially for SaaS, like that sort of thing is, I think that's sort of a testament as well to the, tying back to what we were saying about like building trust and rapport and having, making your support better available to your customers or potential customers or whatever it might be, so that kind of all ties into the same conversation from my point of view around like communicating better, and so whatever that might look like, is obviously, well, you would hope, you've got phone numbers on the website, that's fine. But then you'd also hope that, you've got emails, or perhaps now you've got, we're implementing chatbots, on clients' websites, just so, it can be more of an immediate fix. And that people think, oh, chatbot, I don't want to be sitting there on my phone all day. What a lot of people don't understand is that there's a lot of automation tied into a lot of these tools, so it's not necessarily you having to be there on the phone all the time. Like sometimes a lot of the tools will do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. So it's a pretty interesting space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's about availability. You have to be available for your customers. That's our approach. And I think that, tradies over time will sort of take the similar approach, whether that's a chatbot, whether it's a direct phone line. It's about, again, removing that friction through to someone. And that's where we tend to see the aha moments, is often the customer support conversations. Listening to some of those take place is where you see, a tradie that's struggling on one particular feature and they figure it out, and that's where they go, oh, right, I get it. I understand now why this is valuable, and they sort of proceed to becoming a customer or whatever it might be. So, yeah.
And I think what's fueling a lot of it is the fact that people are less patient today.
Yes. There's an element of that for sure.
It's people like, oh, I want an answer to this now, or I'm just going to go and look somewhere else where I can get an answer right now, kind of thing.
That's why I think it's so important in this industry, because I think if you think about food delivery, there's so many other things that the end consumer experiences where there's very little friction. It's very easy. Even logging into having a problem with Netflix. If you ever use Netflix customer support, it's pretty amazing. It'll answer you straight away. It's so I think because the expectation has been set so high by end customers, whenever they interact with someone in any industry, they have a similar expectation around support and also, like you said, speed to reply. So yeah, I think it's very true.
So, Michael, what's next? Off the back of this report, what's in the pipeline, or what's the next big thing?
We're keeping an eye on this. I think this is something we want to do over a sort of fixed period of time. So we'll run the report again. We'll give it a gap and then run this again and see if things change over time.
I suppose now you've got the benchmark. It could be quite an interesting comparison.
This is sort of the start point, really, in this journey, and then I think in 3 to 6 months we'll see where it lands. So this will be ongoing, and I think in general terms, we're looking at where we can potentially help in some of those areas where tradies are going to struggle, whether it's online presence, making sure that our CRM experience is next level and works well for that, as well as supporting that kind of get paid quick on the cash flow side. I think that's another area that we're doing a lot of work around.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And so would you call Tradify a CRM?
CRM is part of what we offer, yeah. So we are, if you think about Tradify, someone might come via a lead generation vehicle and they arrive in Tradify as an email address, a phone number. This is the customer. Right. That becomes a customer file as far as we're concerned. So gotcha. In many, for the needs of a trader, yes.
It's one of those things I always say to the guys, like it's kind of a loose term these days. It's like saying online marketing, like it could mean so many things, there's like essentially your phone could be a CRM. It manages customer, records. So I know one of the big things that I'll say have issues with is like integrations, so getting some of the technologies to talk so that your job management tool or your job management CRM can talk to your email marketing CRM, and then, all these kind of things. I think that would be an exciting movement that I think would reduce a lot of friction with a lot of different tools that people are, actively using out there.
Yeah, so we spend a lot of time thinking about that. I mean, I think we've solved for most of the accounting package integrations. That was sort of step one.
Yeah.
Making sure that works seamlessly. We've sort of ticked that box, and we'll continue to sort of invest in that area. I think longer term, there will be a need to do more with the kind of what you're describing as kind of the online marketing kind of tools that are available to people, and making that fairly seamless, whether it's a lead that's come via Google or Facebook or wherever that might be. Then I think a lot of the other areas, when I think about CRM and those types of things, I think we can manage that within Tradify. That's the ambition. Like in an ideal world, we want tradies to have as few tools as possible to reduce that friction and user experience and all that good stuff.
No, that's great. All right, well, mate, that's fantastic. Where would you like to send people if they want some more information about Tradify or the report? I mean, obviously, as we said before, the links to these things will be available in the show notes, so you can head across there for your listeners and viewers. But Michael, the website's tradifyhq.com. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah, cool.
Go over there and that'd be great.
Is there a support email or anything like that, or a help info email?
Yeah, I'll supply that to you as well. Yeah, if you just hit the contact us button, you'll get through to someone very quickly.
Cool. Yeah, guys, I encourage you to go check this report out. It's quite interesting. I'd love to also hear your feedback and see if this has been your experience. So by all means, when this pops up, let us know. Actually, I might even publish this report in our group and we can have a bit of a conversation around it and see if your experience has been anything similar to it. So Michael, thank you for putting the work in on this report, and thanks for taking the time to have a chat.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, Matt. Great chatting.
I dare say we might get the opportunity to have a round two of this when the next report comes out. Maybe we can talk about some of the different comparisons that have been drawn.
Yeah, that would be great.
Lovely. All right, listeners. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to another episode of Toolbox Talks. If you're liking what you hear, then you can head across to the siteshed.com where you can join our community by signing up to our Toolbox Talks. You'll get sent a weekly notification, which is basically a highlight of everything that we've spoken about during that week, along with any other industry news that may be relevant or specific to the trades. If you're enjoying the show, you can head across to iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, where you can leave us a review. That would be fantastic, and all the reviews get read out in the show. Likewise, if you have any friends or colleagues that you think would benefit from the show and the episodes that we create, then please go ahead and share it with them.